大家好。
嗯哼，
My name is, yeah, there may be a while. I haven't been joining this program for a while. Lin 老师 has been a wonderful host of this series, but some of the old friends may remember. I'm Shenjan Liao, uh, hello, in charge of education at China Institute. Lin 老师 and I, we started this Lunch and Learn series. Oof, 3 years ago, 4 years
4 years
ago,
ago, I think.
4 years ago.
Uh,
Wow, time flies. 大家好. Yeah, again, there may be new friends joining this series. This is our first session for Lunch and Learn 2026, the year of the horse. First of all, wish everyone a wonderful year of the horse. 祝大家马年快乐，马到成功. A prosperous year. Um, we will start today. Today, wow, I could see so many people are interested in this topic, and we need it about health,
Interesting.
wellness, Chinese traditional medicine, and we have a wonderful speaker for the series this season. Another 4 sessions that we will start today and until June. Alrighty. Feel free to type
Oh,
in, say hello in the chat room. And if you could type in where you are, that would be wonderful. And if you are new to China Institute, please raise your hand. We are located in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan.
mhm.
I see people from London, um, yeah, from Virginia, New Jersey, Baltimore, DC. Thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful. One great thing um, about the online program is, well, we are able to connect with everyone from around the world. As I mentioned, China Institute, we are located in downtown Manhattan. We've been here since 1926. This is a very special year for us. We're celebrating our centennial. Our mission for this 100 years hasn't changed to bridge cultures between the US and China, and of course, to connect with everyone around the world through a deeper understanding of Chinese culture. Lunch and Learn is one of our online programs that's advancing our mission. So it's so great to see everyone. Before we start today's session, I just also want to say if you are in New York or come to visit the city in the next 3 months, we have a wonderful exhibition about Mei Lanfang, and he's one of the greatest Peking opera performers in China in history. In 1930, he visited New York, the United States, and brought Peking opera as a genre of Chinese drama to the world stage. And from that point on, Peking opera became one of the major drama genres in the world. So we are having a exhibition at China Institute's gallery, just opened this week. It's going to be on until July 11th. So if you're in town, please feel free to stop by and let Lin 老师 and I know. We would love to see you in person as well. And so today we are really in for a special treat. Our speaker, Chen 老师, yeah, well, you have read her bio, but I just want to add she's truly a long-term friend of China Institute. We moved downtown in 2015, but Pian Pian has been, well, with China Institute before that in our Upper East Side townhouse. We were there for over 60 years before we moved downtown, the location we currently reside. Um, and well, her expertise, well, you could see she's like really truly cross-culturally, many universities, many disciplines, but it's all around the Chinese language and culture. And especially her dedicated herself to Chinese traditional medicine and also to be an educator and putting this series together with us. To be here. I truly feel it's wonderful to stay this connection with Pian Pian with Chen Laoshi for all these years, and I'm so looking forward to the series. So I will hand this over to Lin Laoshi. Lin Laoshi has been truly instrumental for the Lunch and Learn series, together with our two students, graduate students from East China Normal University, who's doing their internship at China Institute in New York. So even though we are meeting online, this series truly is a cross-cultural partnership between the countries, between the people. And of course, well, it's always, always wonderful to connect with all of you here. All right, so I will hand it over to Lin 老师.
OK，谢谢廖老师。So 欢迎大家，Welcome everyone. So it's great pleasure to meet everyone here at our long-term learn program. So we will meet once a month in the following 1, 2, 3, 4 months, including this one. So I'm very glad so we can have this opportunity to talk about the Chinese culture, the language, and also the related contents together. So every month. So as our traditional, I would like to let everyone know that our whole long-term sessions will be recorded and the link will be shared later in the following up emails. So, and you also can have the access to all the previous long-term learning sessions on our China Institute YouTube web channel. So, and feel free to review them after our sessions. So, as our traditional, the first part will be the interns presentation about Chinese language, Chinese character, and the development of the Chinese traditional characters. So, and first, let's have Yiyue Yang from East China Normal University, who is doing her internship at China Institute to give us the presentation about a few Chinese character and sentence. Yiyue.
Okay, hello everyone. I'll share my screen now. Okay. Can you see my screen?
It's coming up. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to 2026 Spring Lunch and Learn program. I'm Yiyue from East China Normal University, and now I'm doing my internship in China Institute. Today, our topic is the steam of life. We are going to decode qi, this character in traditional Chinese medicine. So, do you see the steam above this hot water? This is exactly what qi means. And these three lines are the main strokes of this character, qi. Could you please read after me? qi.
气
qi. Yeah, thank you. And but in traditional Chinese medicine, qi has more profound meaning, more than just this physical form. To have a better understanding of this, we need to trace back to thousands years ago to the oracle bone. We can see these three lines are very simple, and it's like the steam we saw just now. And Chinese bronze inscriptions and the leather seal character look very similar to the simplified Chinese we use today. But please pay attention to the traditional Chinese character. What's inside is 米, rice. So, 1,000 years ago, qi means giving rise to others. So we can speculate that qi in traditional Chinese medicine may have something to do with food. Actually, qi is the body engine steam, which is from cooking hot food. As long as the steam flows smoothly, you feel great. But what happens if this steam goes out of order? You might be angry, 生气. Could you please read after me? 生气.
生气，生气，生气，
Yes, very good. It means angry, but literally, 生 is generate, 气 is gas or steam. So when you are mad, imagine that your body is like a kettle and you are producing so much extra steam going outside of your body that you are puffing up and going to explode. Now, if you keep 生气 or you eat too much spicy food, you may have pimples or get a sore throat. In this situation, we call it 上火 in Chinese. Could you please read after me? 上火.
上火，
Very good. So, this is a very symbolic Chinese style statement. I think it's very hard to translate into English correspondingly. But literally, 上 means up, 火 means fire. Your inside fire, your inside steam is going up. You are not sick. Your body engine is just overheating. So, how can we put out this fire? We need to use a very extremely magic phrase in Chinese, which we think it can cure almost anything. That is, 多喝热水.多 is more, 喝 is drink, 热水 is hot water. So, can you try to say this sentence? 多喝热水.
多喝
多
热
喝水，
热水，
Perfect. Thank you. So we think hot water can flush the fire and relax our stomach and make this trapped steam going back to the smooth one. So that's why our Chinese prefer hot water than iced water, which we think it may freeze our qi. So, if you manage your stress well and if you eat well, remember 多喝热水, you might achieve a perfect balance. In Western culture, you may say, "Oh, you look so pretty." But in Chinese, the highest compliment is you are full of energy and spirit. 你很有精气神. Can you try to say it? 你很有精气神.
精气神，
有精气神，
Yes, very good. Thank you. So let's see the three parts. 精 is the physical foundation. It's like the battery of your body. And qi is a flowing steam. It's like the electricity running through you. And the last one, 神, is spirit, showing as the glow in your eyes. When these three are aligned, you possess 精气神. So, can we try to say it again? 你很有精气神.
精气神，
你很有精气神。
Yes, very good.
精气神。
Yeah, thank you. So that's all about my presentation and hope all of you have a good 精气神 and remember 多喝热水. Thank you.
多喝热水，谢谢。
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Yi. So, and also, I would like to let everyone know. So, we encourage you to engage with our speaker. Have any questions? You can put it in the chat box, or just open your mic, talk to our speaker Chen 老师, or send the message to me. Okay. So, with further ado, I would like to turn the screen over to Chen 老师. Chen 老师, Chen 偏偏老师.
Hey everyone, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Great. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. 大家好. Welcome and thank you so much for joining me today. So my name is Pen Pen Chen, Chen Pian Pian, and I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine, an herbalist and licensed acupuncturist based here in New York City. I was a Chinese language instructor, as Shendan 老师, Liao 老师 mentioned, at China Institute many, many years ago, when we were still in the Upper East Side. And then I actually lived in the financial district at the time. And then I moved to Jersey City, and then China Institute moved right across the street from where I used to live. So we just kind of missed each other there. But I'm super excited to be back today for this 4-part Lunch and Learn series on Chinese medicine. So over these 4 sessions, we're going to explore Chinese medicine not just as a medical system, but as part of Chinese culture, language, and ways of understanding the human body. So we're going to be going on a journey together from the ancient cosmos all the way into our bodies and then out into our daily lives. And so to help us on our journey, out to navigate our journey, we'll need a map. So that's why this first session I'm calling our cosmic map, or the cosmic map. So a disclaimer first, before we begin, a quick note. So everything shared in these lectures are used for general educational purposes, and it's not intended as personal medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. So Chinese medicine is individualized and based on a comprehensive assessment of each person's unique constitution and patterns. So if you are interested in applying these concepts that we talk about to your own health and wellness, please consult a licensed Chinese medicine practitioner who can conduct a full intake and provide appropriate guidance. But if you have any questions, as Ling Laoshi had mentioned, feel free to type it in the chat or just unmute yourself. I can't see you when I have the screen on here like this, but Ling Laoshi will monitor the chat for me, so thank you. Oops. Oops. Okay, so I would like to take this opportunity to start by expressing my gratitude to my mentors, Dr. Sharon Zhao, who ignited and inspired me to take my very first steps on this path in Chinese medicine, to the China Institute, to Liao Shenzhan 老师 and Lin Yongqiang 老师 for making this possible. And of course, to you all for bringing your curiosity, your presence, and your energy today. And thank you to Yiyue as well for the great introduction that'll lead perfectly into the rest of our discussion today. So my clinic is named 随缘堂, which I guess you could call it sort of this go with the flow or of destiny or fate, right? In Chinese, as we say, 天时地利人和. So we have the cosmos and everything aligning together. So that's what I feel like, you know, in anything, in any, you know, I guess you could say patient or anybody that I come in contact with while doing any of these lectures, it's something has brought us together in a particular time and space, right? Because it was sort of meant to be. So whatever it is that resonates with you, please take it and use as you see fit and leave behind what doesn't suit you, right? If it's meant to be, it'll find you again. And if it's not, then it was meant to be let go. So with that, if you're ready, let's begin our journey. So when you hear the words Chinese medicine, what's the very first word that pops into your mind? You can feel free to unmute yourself, shout it out, or type it into the chat.
Acupuncture.
Acupuncture, yes. What else?
Chrysanthemum.
Chrysanthemum, great, yeah.
菊花
Herbs.
茶
Yeah, 菊花, yep.
Natural.
herbs.
Natural, yep. Herbs. Yeah, great. So we're going to watch just a very short. So this is a series made by CCTV. We're not going to watch the whole video, but it's a bunch of different stories. I just really like the theme song, so we'll watch and listen to the theme song. It has English subtitles as well, Chinese subtitles as well. And so we can sort of maybe see some of the things that you all mentioned. Let me know if the volume is not great. You hear that okay? Not, I can adjust it. Sound okay? All right, so some images look kind of familiar, and maybe some things are maybe kind of new. This particular episode is on Hua Tuo, who's one of the legendary physicians in Chinese history. People of Chinese heritage often think of Hua Tuo when you think of Chinese medicine, and there are a lot of idioms and phrases describing sort of really excellent, amazing doctors as being sort of the reincarnation of Hua Tuo. And he actually invented an early form of general anesthesia called Ma Fei San, which allowed him to perform surgeries. So a lot of times people think of Chinese medicine and they just think of, really bitter herbs or acupuncture and some of the things that we mentioned. But actually, we did do surgery as well, sort of back in the day. All right, let's move to the next. Sorry, Fatu, we don't have time for you today. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. Oops. Okay, here we go. Okay. So that sort of provides an overview of Chinese medicine and many associated phrases and stories. But if we look at the Chinese character for medicine, yi, right? So this is the, can you see my cursor on the screen? Or let's maybe
可以的，
可以吗? Okay.
可以。
How's that? Is that better? Okay, here. Okay, can you see the laser? Yeah.
Mhm.
So the traditional character, this is traditional and this is simplified. You can see that the character is made up of different parts, right? So we often talk about a radical part, sometimes a phonetic part, and things like that. But if you look at the picture here, so actually what it was composed of, there's sort of an arrow that's being removed. The arrow is sort of the cause of the injury, right? Often like in war or something like that. And then this container over here is sort of an ancient sharps container, I guess if you will, for medical waste. Or at least being used for that purpose. And then wine, right? Which is often associated and traditionally, and sometimes now as well, in Chinese medicine as either using it for sterilization, purposes, or for also medicinal use. Okay, so that's from the Chinese character in of itself, which kind of tells an overarching story of what medicine sort of is, or how we can sort of see it. Okay, so in terms of Chinese medicine, I feel like nowadays when we think of it, what often comes to mind are these types of treatment modalities. Probably the most common, as the first person who shouted out, was acupuncture, right? And there's a very specific reason for that, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But there is much more that lies beyond the needles. Right, I would say that that there's 8 major modalities, right? Herbal medicine, nutritional therapy, acupuncture, and moxibustion, Tui Na massage, sound therapy, and Qigong meditation. these aren't separate systems, right? You can think of them as very different instruments in the same orchestra, right? In Chinese medicine, a Chinese medicine practitioner chooses a particular combination based on a variety of considerations. So the underlying principles and worldview that shapes how the medicine approaches healing. It's a really long history, and so there are so many treatment modalities. So let's take a look at some of them, and maybe some of them look a little familiar as well. Oh, yes. And a lot of it, things are embedded in Chinese culture and daily life, right? So you had also mentioned, so here we can call your attention to here, right? So Chinese people love hot water. So I just a short story when I was in Chinese medicine school, and also shout out to I just noticed some of my classmates are actually here. So hey guys, um, I was drinking, just a thermos that had hot water in it, and my friend sitting next to me was like, "What are you drinking?" And I'm like, "Hot water." And she's like, "And like, what's in it?" I'm like, "No, just hot water." Like the hot water isn't waiting for anything; it's just hot water, right? But for her, it was very. She would always either, put a tea bag in it or lemon in it or something, right? But just the thought of drinking hot water with nothing in it was a little bit strange to her or just unfamiliar. Right? But for Chinese people, drinking hot water is sort of a cure-all a lot of the times for things, right? And so, and also, different herbal remedies, and we'll talk about that in our future discussions. I don't really have time for that today, but a lot of them are embedded in daily Chinese culture and daily living, right? And sometimes we don't necessarily know the reasons behind it. So, for example, when my sister was pregnant, my mom just said, make sure you don't pat your sister's shoulder. And was like, oh, well, how come? I thought, so I made up in my mind that the reason was because I didn't want to startle her or scare her, right? But and then when I asked my mom, I'm like, how come? She couldn't really explain why, but she just kind of knew that was something to avoid doing, right? And the reason why is because in Chinese medicine, there's an acupuncture point, dianjing, on the top of our shoulders that can induce contractions and potentially miscarriage if it's strongly stimulated, right? So it's just an overall point that we tend to avoid. Okay. So cupping, maybe some of you, have anybody seen this or at all or had this done before? Or maybe seen this on Michael Phelps during the Olympics?
Type
How many?
of
Yeah.
cup.
Yeah. Have you read cupping before? Anybody else?
It's really popular in Shaolin.
Mm-hmm.
My
Yeah.
my father was saved in North Africa during World War II
Mm-hmm.
when he was quite ill by his person bringing in someone who could cup him.
Oh, wow.
And he'd never seen it before. And then we were in China in 81,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw this round glass globe, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And he told me the story then of how this particular medical system had really saved his life because he was quite feverish.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the marks, they look kind of scary, right? They kind of look
Yeah.
like, they're really painful, like bruises or some kind of like, you know, yeah, like, people suddenly wonder they look like scary alien love bites or something, like where do these things come from? And then when you hear of like fire and cupping, it just sounds like this, spectacle of things, right? But for sure, it's something that can really make a big difference. When I did this talk in Oberlin College, there was a student she was a pianist, and she just, her facial complexion was, she was pretty pale, just kind of overall, like, the sort of her body posture was kind of, forward because she's always playing the piano and kind of very, very tight all the time. And so just did a couple of cups for her, and she was like a different person. And the cupping, it's not really left on for that long, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. And after that, she was smiling. You could see like her facial complexion she had rosier cheeks. There was, more blood in her lips and things like that. So oftentimes Chinese medicine gets a bad rap of like 慢郎中, right? Like it takes a long time for stuff to work, which is true, right? Because the things that accumulate in our body didn't happen overnight, right? So it's not a miracle, cure or anything like that. So it's not going to necessarily treat things that have been, chronic right away, but there could be, immediate changes that also happen as well. and doesn't necessarily need to take that long, right? So here the cups, the fire just looks kind of scary, but really what it is it's just creating suction, like a vacuum.
I don't understand how it works.
Yeah. So what happens is I don't have actually I can't really show you, but if you look at this image, right? So we light some like a cotton ball or something on fire, right? And then we're using the heat so it's not so much the fire, but we're using the heat as to creating a vacuum to create a suction, right? And then from that, you're kind of drawing out the stagnant blood, right? And then making things that have been stuck for a really long time move. And that's what you're seeing in a lot of these images. So a lot of times when it's extra purple, like almost to like a black kind of darkness, is a lot of that stagnant stuff that was inside before being drawn to the surface.
So essentially, it's another way of releasing the qi.
Yeah, correct. Moving it and releasing it. For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Can we, how about electric cupping with without the fire, but an electric power?
Yeah, so now there are, because of various, I feel like conveniences, I guess you could say, right? Because now you can buy these cupping sets, like they're vacuum, like a vacuum gun, like a suction, as opposed to using fire. And then now there are electric versions of it as well. I feel like in terms of the level of suction varies a bit, but a lot of times, and now what they also do is some of those electric things, they also have a component of heat, right? Because you're kind of mimicking the fire from that as well. So you want a little bit of that heat to get things moving. You know, there's sort of pros and cons to it. It makes it easier for you to do it to yourself, although we always advise, to make sure that you have sort of the guidance of a Chinese medicine practitioner, because sometimes people will cup either too much or too often or too long, and then you can also create a negative effect on that too, right? So just because it's accessible and a lot of things aren't regulated, right? Like Chinese herbs and things, you can just go to Chinatown and go buy them. Even though, herbal formulas, you really do want them coming from Chinese medicine practitioners, but it's not necessarily regulated in that way. So, but just because they're accessible doesn't necessarily mean that anybody should or, do it to themselves sort of all the time for anything like that. But they are readily accessible now. And then gua sha, has anybody seen this or had this done before? Yeah, this looks scary too, right? It almost looks like the person has been whipped or something, and it looks super painful and sort of this petechia. Also this purplish, reddish kind of images. So gua sha is typically done, with something like this. They're made out of bone or jade or horn or antler. And it scrapes along the skin over the meridian pathways, and it releases stagnation, clears heat, and boosts circulation. So this movie, has anybody seen this movie? Just out of curiosity. No, so the film was released back in 2001. And it's about I don't recommend it necessarily for its, amazing acting, but, or even the storyline per se, but the general gist is that it's the Chinese American family whose son is treated with gua sha by his grandfather who's visiting from China after he catches a cold. And then so he does the scraping on him, and then the kid goes to school, and then these marks are seen on him, and then they misinterpret it as abuse. And then it kind of goes through this whole thing where, yeah, they're trying to take the son away, and and this and that. So, but so it shows sort of this cultural misunderstanding that can arise when there are different medical worldviews, right? And they kind of come together. Or, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Somebody.
Was this a true story in like Texas or something?
I think it may have been actually. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but I think so. All right. Or in 2015, Tuyoyo received the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine for this. It wasn't really technically a discovery per se, but she used ancient texts, right, to help. And then she used modern technology to extract this compound used for the treatment of malaria, right? So maybe some people know Chinese medicine from that. Or from Qigong, which may be familiar to some people. Maybe some of you practice this. China Institute, if you've ever been, also has Tai Chi classes, there as well. But this is one of the more popular routines, which is called the 8 brocades, 8段锦. And with like cute little bears doing it, doesn't it make you just want to do it too? All right. But Tai Chi, or Tai Chi Quan, right? Oops. Okay, we're not watching the video, but is also something that you might have seen maybe people doing in the parks, or maybe you've done it yourself. And oftentimes it's associated with older people, right? And sort of doing it because it looks slower, it looks more gentle, things like that. But actually, it's not that easy to do, and it focuses, it helps cultivate your qi and improves your balance and flexibility, it calms the mind, and it connects your body to the rhythms of nature. But one thing I want to look at is when we talk about Tai Chi Quan, right? So oftentimes in English we see it as Tai Chi, right? Spelled CHI. But here it's not qi like the qi that Yer was talking about before, not that qi, not this qi, right? But it's actually ji, which is in Hanyu Pinyin spelled Ji. In Pinyin it's like this, right? This was just based on a different romanization system. So just not to get those two confused. And this was a movie called 推手. I don't know if anybody has seen that movie. That was a little more popular than the other one. But acupuncture, if we look at, is probably one of the most common associations to Chinese medicine, right? So in Chinese, we call it 针灸, right? But in English, it's only partially translated. So in Chinese, it's actually this needling, right? So this 针刺, so 针 being needle and 刺 being sort of like a pricking, right? And then the 灸, it comes from 艾灸, which is moxibustion. But when we translate, or when the word got translated into English, they just call 针灸 acupuncture, and they sort of left the moxibustion part out of there. And so there's a particular story of how acupuncture sort of entered the Western world, right? So in 1971, New York Times journalist James Reston was traveling in China with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. And so he developed appendicitis and had emergency surgery in Beijing. And after the surgery, his post-op team was treated with acupuncture. And then he wrote about it, and it sort of got a lot of Americans really interested in it. And then in 1972, when Kissinger's delegation visited China, they actually witnessed acupuncture being used as anesthesia during surgery. Right? And so President Nixon's physician was so impressed that he became a vocal advocate. And so pain relief, this idea that acupuncture was this miracle cure for pain, was its initial association. And so nowadays, we think about if we think about sort of what drives a lot of our medical decisions, right? Unfortunately, a lot of times it's what insurance will cover, right? And so acupuncture, in terms of what insurance will cover now, it used to cover, pain and like shoulder pain, back pain. Unfortunately, now a lot of times it only just covers back pain. I don't know why they don't think shoulder pain is important anymore, or any other pain. But so there's sort of that association, right? And then they don't really realize that Chinese medicine can be related to almost anything health related, right? Because Chinese medicine isn't about treating diseases, it's about treating people. So what is Chinese medicine then exactly? So this diagram is sort of the way I think about it. So it sort of sits at this intersection of science, geography, philosophy, art, culture, agricultural science, astronomy, and overall lifestyle, right? So Chinese medicine is not really a technique, right? It is a way of seeing and a way of being. It's fundamentally about relationships, right? Between the body and nature, between internal states and external conditions, between the individual and the cosmos. And in modern times, a lot of these areas may seem like mystical or pseudoscience because our notions and understanding of science and technology are very different now. Right now, we know like computers and AI and things like astrology or cosmology, they sort of almost occur to us like superstitions, like more so than anything else, right? But mostly that's because we don't really understand them, and we didn't grow up learning these things as the things that everybody sort of learned, right? And not so much, so then we don't really understand them, but it's not because they're actually made up, right? So Chinese medicine, in terms of an approach to health and wellness, I kind of like to look at sort of these three core principles, right? And then they differentiate from Western biomedicine, right? So healthcare versus medical care. What do I mean by that? Well, nowadays, again, back to sort of our discussion about insurance, is that, we go to the doctor most of the time, aside from your annual physical or something, when we're already sick, right? And so it's more about medical care, not so much about prevention of disease or maintaining and cultivating our health, right? So it doesn't really ask, like, how do we stay well? It's just thinking about, well, how do we fix what's already broken? And so the second, this customization versus a one size fits all. So there's no single formula for, headaches or insomnia or anxiety. So every person's pattern is unique, and the treatment then will have to match and be according to that person. So even the person, today versus a couple years ago or, a couple months from now is not the same person, right? And so if they're having a headache now, it may be for a variety of reasons that are different than when they have a headache a couple months from now. And then third, sort of this root versus symptom. So Chinese medicine is always asking, what is the underlying cause, right? So treating the symptom without addressing the root is like, as we say in Chinese, 斩草不除根，春风吹又生, right? So when you don't pull the root, the weed from the root, right? Then when spring comes around again and the wind blows again, then the weeds are just going to come back, right? So if we look at, sort of this healthcare versus medical care prevention, we're also looking at how do we regulate and condition ourselves on a daily basis, right? Or moment to moment. So ideally, we treat things before they even happen or before they get worse, right? So prevention is key, right? And that brings us to these, in Chinese, we used to often say that there are three levels of doctors, right? So there is the superior physician who treats illness before it even emerges, right? Or ordinary physicians treat emerging illnesses, and subordinate physicians treat illness that has already emerged. So unfortunately, nowadays, most of us are this subordinate physician level, right? Because most of our patients come to us when they're not feeling well already. Although there are some patients that come and they're here for maintenance, right? They come every week, and then we're able to kind of make these adjustments, right? But if we think about it in sort of this kind of analogy or metaphor perspective, if we think about like tuning an instrument, right, or bringing our car to the mechanic, right? So if you think about a really, really good mechanic can potentially look at the treads on your wheels and tires, and say, okay, well, this is sort of your driving pattern, and this is where you mostly drive, and this is how long you drive, and taking all those things into consideration and say, okay, you need to rotate your tires more, you need to do this and that, or your alignment maybe needs to be a little bit adjusted, right? So that, because if you don't make these adjustments, in a couple of years, your car is going to get really worn down, right? Or an instrument, if you think about, instruments need to constantly be tuned, right? So even if they're not played and they're just sitting there because of weather, because of, and a lot of instruments are made out of wood, right? The interaction of the air and the climate and all those things will cause it to go out of tune, right? And so we're constantly tuning that. So we do that to our cars and our instruments. We're not really necessarily thinking about how do we do that to ourselves, right? Or even if we are, like, how are we making those adjustments, right? So in Chinese medicine, we call it 养生 or nourishing life. And we'll talk more about this concept a little bit further. Today, we're just going to kind of have a little bit of an overview, right? So if we think about, even the best doctors, right? Just like language teachers, even the best language teacher, they can't follow you, or they're not like in your pocket that every time you need to say something, they pop out and kind of give you a little pointer on how to say that, right? So even the best doctors, they can't be with you 24/7. They can't be there constantly reminding you. So overall, you're the only person that's with you all the time, right? And so how is it that you are approaching and looking at making adjustments and modifications in your lifestyle, right? According to, different things, according to the seasons, according to, our age, according to what's going on, stress levels, things like that, right? And so what is it that we can do to when we're depleting ourselves in all these different ways, what can we do to build up, right? And then how can we strike that balance? So, so how do we go about nourishing life? Well, it's about, we said, lifestyle, right? So these micro adjustments. So I play table tennis. Anybody play table tennis?
I don't even understand what you said.
Nice. Yeah. So I play table tennis, and a lot of times when you watch pros playing, right, they're not like in other sports where they're like running, because the table, is not that big, right? They're not running, like in tennis across the court and those types of things, in huge movements, right, when they're about to hit the ball. But it's because they're constantly in motion. They're constantly just making adjustments ever so slightly, right? So there's no big sudden jerky movements necessarily, right? And so in table tennis, we call it 碎步, which is like broken steps, sort of like these small, quick baby steps, if you will, right? Or if you think about if you have a very messy apartment, let's say, right? And you're thinking about, well, how do I clean? I don't know where to start, right? So if you just start with decluttering and start with, maybe just doing the dishes, all the dishes that you have like every single day, right? Then those things won't start to build up and it won't have to be this huge like project that you have to work on, right? So much the same with our health. A lot of times, now everything starts to hurt, right? And then what do I do? And what do I do? Well, sometimes it can be overwhelming, but we can think about what are the little adjustments that we can do. How do I, maybe if I'm, I didn't really sleep well last night, then okay, how do I adjust for that? Maybe I take a nap today, right? Or maybe I go for a walk if I'm feeling, a little bit agitated or there's a lot of stress, that's going on and these types of things, as opposed to kind of being on this automatic cruise control where I just go, 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 and we're not really even thinking about why am I doing what I'm doing, right? And I think a lot of it kind of was a sort of big kind of jolt and shift for a lot of people when the pandemic hit, because all of a sudden we couldn't do anything, or we couldn't go anywhere, right? And a lot of people then, sort of stopped and made new choices and made new decisions based off of sort of what worked for them, eventually once, things were kind of back to this new normal, right? So, yeah. So how do we make these adjustments in our daily lives? Well, to understand Chinese medicine is to understand how the ancient people observed nature, right? And how they saw themselves within this whole grand scheme of things. So everything in Chinese medicine begins with this careful observation of the natural world, right? Ancient Chinese physicians were extraordinary observers, right? They watched the seasons, the tides, the cycles of the sun and the moon. They didn't have Netflix, they didn't have, smartphones, they didn't have all this stuff, right? So they had time to look and observe things, right? So they noticed patterns, how certain winds brought certain illnesses, right? How different illnesses happened at different times depending on if they were, up in the north versus the south, and how cold was contracted and how warmth expanded, and how water flows from high to low, like these types of things that happen in nature, right? And then they mapped those patterns onto the human body. So the body was understood as a miniature nature, right? A microcosm that reflected the macrocosm, right? So that's a foundational view in Chinese medicine. So this philosophical foundation of Chinese medicine is Taoism, right? 道家思想, right? So Dao, which means, well, difficult to really define or translate, but for lack of better words, it means the way, right? And it is this underlying principle of all existence. So the force that flows through everything, right? So that Dao De Jing, which is the probably one of the most profound texts ever written, it tells us that Dao gives birth to one, right? And then one gives birth to two, and two gives birth to three, and then three gives birth to 10,000, which is sort of this all things, right? 道生一，一生二，二生三，三生万物. Right? So that is from nothingness of sorts. And again, these are sort of loose translations. You get sort of unity, from unity, polarity, from polarity, complexity, right? So from complexity, then everything, all of existence. And so that's sort of the cosmological map underlying everything in Chinese medicine. And 道法自然, so going towards the natural flow of things, right? The things that how nature happens, and often cyclically, right? So we've probably all seen this yin yang symbol before, right? This yin yang taiji. So it can be on t-shirts or jewelry, or people even have on tattoos, or even this, slot machine thing here as well, right? So it's in our mainstream pop culture, but what does it exactly mean, right? What does it actually mean? Well, we may never really be able to explain it per se, but the taiji symbol represents the dynamic interplay of two opposites, but they're also complementary forces, right? So the black represents yin, which is things often associated like cool or black or descending, interior, feminine, these types of concepts, right? As compared to, the white representing yang, so warm, brightness, ascending, exterior, masculine. And to note that within, if we look at the taiji tu, right, the image, is that within each half there is a small part of the other, right? So yin contains the seed of yang, and yang contains the seed of yin, right? Nothing is absolute. And so the I Ching, which is the Book of Changes, is one of the oldest texts, I think, probably in all of human history. And it discusses the foundational concept of yin and yang. And so each of these 64 hexagrams represents a different state of energy and a different moment in this sort of ever-changing constant, right? So the only thing that's constant is change, right? And I kind of look at it as like a Chinese binary code, if you will. Right, so for Chinese medicine, the I Ching offers a lot of insight that reality is not static, right? Health is not a fixed state. It's a dynamic process. We're always moving, always changing. Things are always tending towards this balance if we're trying to sort of align to nature's patterns. But once you get to that, sort of you're tending towards or you're moving towards it, but are you ever sort of just there and then there forever? No, right? Because things are constantly changing. So if we look at the character, if we know 一二三, right, in Chinese, we can look at that here. I'll come right back. Right, if we look at san, right, so we start with, actually, if we start with yi, right, we look at yi and sort of the heavens here, and then we have er, right, heaven and earth, and then san as being human in the middle, right? But if we go back and look at the character of yin yang itself, right, it tells us sort of everything, right? So yang literally means the sunny side of the hill. The character contains the hill radical, right, on this side here. And then it represents sort of, and it has, if we look at on the right side, we look at the simplified character here. When they simplified the character, they have 日, which is the sun, directly on the right side. And then in the simplified version of yin, right, we have 月, which is moon. So you can sort of see the way that that character was simplified from the traditional version, right? And so yang, represents concepts like warmth and light and activity, expansion, and yin, which is the shady side of the hill, is the character contains the same radical, but it has this cloud shadow, right, which suggests the moon, right? And yin is coolness, stillness, rest, contraction, right? So if we think about, and it has to be in relation to each other. So if we think about 比字句, right? 比 in Chinese, when you're coming A, B, B something, right? When you're comparing two things, you have to have at least two things, right? If you're using the B structure, it has to be in relation to something. It can't just exist on its own. Okay. Okay, if we look at 夕阳, right? 夕, so sunset literally means the yang of evening, right? So we can sort of see of how that's constantly changing, right? When night turns into day and day turns into night, right? And it's this constant cycle. So in this yin-yang worldview is embedded in the Chinese culture, right? Or Chinese language, and then that's culture in of itself. So if you think about these pairs, like 多少, 大小, 深浅, 盛衰, right? So we have more or less, big and small, deep and shallow, flourishing and declining, right? The language is built on this polarity. Everything exists in relationship to something else. I remember when I was little, my mom was cooking and then she asked me like, 咸蛋怎么样? 咸 being salty, 蛋 being bland, right? But 咸蛋, I don't know if anybody's ever had it, also means like these salty salty duck egg yolks, right? So she was asking me like 咸蛋怎么样? I'm like, where's the 咸蛋? Like, what is she talking about? But really she was asking like, how was the flavor? How was the taste? Right. And so in Chinese, that's sort of how we talk about it. Isn't necessarily a separate word, but putting those two concepts together to represent the word taste, right? How is the salty slash blandness, right, of the food? Like, how is it? Is it good? Right. Okay. And so with that, let's take a look at these three anchor words that will serve as our foundation for what we will be discussing, right? So dao, which is the way we talked about, the underlying principle, right? The pattern of everything, if you will. And taiji, the pattern of polarity, the constant dance of the yin and yang that generates all phenomenon. And qi, right? The movement that animates. So the vital force that flows through all living things. So qi, it's very difficult to translate. We don't really have a great equivalent, right? So it's not electricity, it's not exactly energy, right? There isn't really a good word in English that fully encompasses the meaning. It's sort of this animating force, if you will. If you think about it as it's what makes the difference between a living body and a body that is no longer alive, right? So if you think about looking at something that is living, right? You can sort of tell that there's life. There's a life force that's there, right? Versus something that has deceased, right? Or is no longer alive. You can see that something is no longer there anymore, right? And so if we look at the 6 operating principles of yin and yang, and then we'll actually probably stop here today because of time, and then we can take some questions, and then we can continue next month. But we look at the 6 principles of yin and yang, right? So we have that they're opposites, right? Yin and yang are contrasting forces like night and day, cold and heat, but they're interdependent. So one cannot exist without the other, right? You can't know warmth without knowing what cold is, right? Or dynamic balance, right? There is a constant adjustment. So sleep balances activity, right? Rest balances effort, right? So if you've been sitting for a long time, right, and a lot of yin is accumulating, right, because you're not moving, then, or like kids, I work with kids a lot, and so oftentimes we give them movement breaks because it's difficult for them to sit still all the time. Difficult for us too, right? We want to get up and move a little bit, right? And so if we think about mutual consumption, right? So excess of one depletes the other. So if we think about overworking, so too much activity, too much yang, it depletes the yin. If we think about the term burnout, right? Exhaustion, almost like burning the candle at both ends, right? And then intertransformation. So extreme yin becomes yang and vice versa. So cold can turn into a fever, right? Depression can flip into mania. Extreme stillness creates the need for movement and the relative nature, right? So nothing is purely yin or nothing is purely yang. Everything is yang, or evening is yang compared to midnight, but then it's yin compared to noon, right? So the context is what determines everything. And so next time, we'll talk more about this TCM worldview of the body as a mirror, right? The concept of 天人合一. But I'm happy to stop sharing here. Answer any questions if anybody has any questions about me.
谢谢陈老师. So I just put a few questions in your private chat box. That's from the chat box.
Yeah.
And then we can take the questions from our audience. So you can
Yeah,
go
so
back.
cupping, so cupping, it's often said that there's no real sort of exact explanation or moment in time, right? Because there's sort of different various sort of stories that kind of explain it. But one of the most common explanations is that, if you have like some kind of insect or animal that had some sort of poison or something, and then they needed something to suction out that poison or venom or those types of things. So oftentimes people, because you didn't have any other apparatus, would suck it out literally, right? And then with their mouths, right? But then they felt, that's not so safe, right? Because then you're ingesting some of that poison as well. So what's another way? How do I do that? How do I get that stuff out without also endangering myself, right? So so that was sort of one of the early, reasons. For scraping or those types of things, if you think about like if we bang into something, right, what's our first natural reaction to soothe that pain? What do we do?
Rub it.
We rub it, right? Yeah. So it's sort of our innate natural reaction. And so they started, rubbing it. And then, well, you rub it with your hand or your hand gets tired. So it's like, oh, what else can I rub it with? Like a rock, right? Or like a stick or something. So a lot of it was sort of, I guess, if you want to say trial and error, but a lot of it all originally started with some sort of thing from nature based off of what it was that they were going through at that time.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Chinese medicine, how does Chinese medicine treat psychiatric illnesses like bipolar or mental illness?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in Chinese medicine, we don't technically have those disorders, right? Because we have patterns of things that exist in our bodies, right? And so we'll talk about it next time, if not the time after. Um, how do people get sick? Like, why does illness happen, right? We look at a lot of people and people seem really healthy and, vibrant and all this other stuff. And then something happens and they're no longer with us, right? Like, what happened? Or why does one person get sick, catch a cold or something, and then the other person is fine, right? So we'll talk about, individual constitutions, how that comes into play, and then also like ways that pathogens get into our bodies, right? So external pathogens like climate, right? Like catching a cold, like literally that cold, right? Or our emotional, our emotions, really. So I would say, as adults, a lot of our, illnesses or ailments might initially we come into the clinic because our shoulder hurts or we have back pain or something. And then you have a couple of sessions and that gets a little bit better. And then other stuff starts unraveling, like sort of like peeling the onion, right? And then it's like, oh, well, what else are you going through? Oh, I just lost my job. Or, oh, I have financial troubles or I have this and that, right? So all of those things come into play because we don't exist in a vacuum, right? We exist with all the stuff that's going on.
Can I ask?
Please, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the presentation, first of all. Very
Oh, my pleasure.
informative.
Thank you. Thank you for
I
being
look
here.
forward to the next three. How do you measure the effectiveness of some of the Chinese or all of the Chinese traditional medicine applications, such as if you go to a cupping session, how do you actually measure, or if there's one,
Yeah.
when you get there and when you leave, for example?
That's a really great question. And I think that that's often why Chinese medicine sometimes can get a bad rap, right? Because it's like, where's the data? How is this like, what's the research behind? Like, how does this stuff work? Is it just a placebo? Those types of things, right? So sometimes you can see it from certain things, right? Like the cupping marks and those types of things. So if I'm cupping an area that doesn't have any sort of issue, then it's not going to show up, right? Those marks won't just be there for every place that you cup. Or scraping. Sometimes I can scrape and I'm scraping the same level of, pressure and then nothing happens. In another area, I'm just scraping a little and all of a sudden there's like tons of stuff. So that's sort of one way that we can sort of, I guess, if you want to say measure, or that there's something that like a effect, I guess you could say, from a particular modality. So in terms of, like acupuncture or like tuina massage, right? And we'll talk about a lot of that stuff too when you have, pain, right? Like why is there pain, right? Or what's happening during, acupuncture when the chi starts to move. Like you may feel, I mean, I personally, almost 99.9% of the time during an acupuncture session, I fall asleep, right? And a lot of people will fall asleep. And it's because our body is kind of getting into this like almost like a delta state, right? We get into a really deep relaxation. Or if you've ever had like a sound bath, right? It's almost like the level or the depth of that rest is almost like not our normal ordinary, I go to sleep kind of rest, right? So there's a lot of these sort of qualitative ways. And a lot of times the patients will say, oh my gosh, I felt, whatever, whatever. And then I'll be like, oh, that's great. Or like I mentioned, with the student at Oberlin, where, everybody could see she felt it herself too, that sort of comparison of, just visually. Right. And then a lot of times it's how you feel too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chen Laoshi, and thank you, everyone. So due to the time limited, so we only take the last 2 questions. So one is from David. David raised his hand before. So do you still have questions? Oh, there is one question in the chat box. So may I ask how zhenjiu and the cupping function or treat different? That's the last question.
Sorry, say that again. How?
May I ask how much 针灸和拔罐的不
Mhm.
同的 function and
不同。
treat different?
Yeah, so 拔罐 is mostly so cupping. A lot of times it's used for muscular skeletal things, right? So like my shoulder hurts or back pain, those types of things. And oftentimes the cups are on the yang meridian, so on our back, right? And so sometimes they can just be stationary cups or they can be sliding cups to move a lot of that stagnation. And if anybody's had cupping, oftentimes people will describe it as once during the cupping, the cups are on really tight, right? And so you feel sort of that tightness. And then once they're sort of off, you feel almost like extra relaxed. People are like, oh, I feel really sleepy, you know? It's almost a little bit like when you are, squeezing something really tight. If I squeeze, and then all of a sudden I relax, right? I feel almost more relaxed than I did before I squeezed, right? One, you have that sort of point of comparison, but also because you are that yin yang, properties as well. And then acupuncture is, I guess you use the sort of the metaphor of like if a particular area, right, has pain, that area has kind of been forgotten, like in your body a little bit, right? You don't really move it as much because it hurts and those types of things. So the acupuncture needles are really kind of like tapping your body or your shoulder and saying, hey, body, remember me? Like I'm still a part of your body here. Like come over here and you got to do something, right? The chi and the blood, come over here and do your natural thing of self-healing, essentially, right? Getting yourself sort of back to that point where you can do. And then versus, let's say, like herbs, where that's something external, right? That you're putting inside your body. So the acupuncture needles, they don't stay in your body, right? They have that effect, which is why you sort of have that numbing, heavy, sort of kind of feeling too, which is that de qi, the therapeutic level and the depth, right? That you're kind of getting that effect from the needles. And then the practitioner's chi as well, interacting with the patient's chi.
Okay, 好，谢谢陈老师，Yeah, thank you, 陈老师. And okay, it's over 1 p.m. now, so thank you everyone for coming and joining us today. And I think the topic and 陈老师 presentation is really, really interesting. I have learned a lot, and so I noticed the difference between the different treatments. So okay, so I want to remind everyone, so the recording will be available at China Institute YouTube channel. I will also send it to you in the email next week. So 谢谢陈老师 again, and
谢谢
see you next
谢谢。
time, everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
You all,
you.
see you guys next time.
谢
Have a
谢
good one.
我们下个月见。
再见，谢谢，再
再
见，
见。
再见，再见。